right, here is another comment left under one of my videos. Is the A1C really the problem, which is a measure of a 90-day average of glucose? And that's about right. Sometimes some people say it goes beyond 90 days, but it's around 90 days. So it's giving you an average of how you've been doing. It's when I was a school teacher, we had pop quizzes that will test over how you did over the last couple of days. And we had major exams that would test how you did over the last couple of months. So your glucose meter is like a pop quiz. How you been doing the last day or so? When you wake up in the morning and test your morning fasting glucose, that's like a pop quiz. Your A1C is more like a major exam. How you been doing over the last few months, last 3 months, basically. And so this person says, okay, the A1C, it's a 90-day average. Isn't fasting insulin the root of the problem? Well, it sounds like he's listening to Dr. Jason Fung, and fasting glucose is a problem for sure. He says, or she says, is high insulin the thing that causes cardiovascular disease through inflammation? And yes, it can well be. Can you have high insulin even with lower glucose numbers? The answer is yeah, especially if you're moving toward diabetes. The dam may not have broken yet, and your A1C may still look pretty decent. You're probably at the level where your doctor says, well, you better be careful. You've been kind of moving up. You were at 5.4 for a number of years, and now you're at 5.8. That's pre-diabetes. That's a problem. But still, you're in the fives, and you may watch this channel a little bit and say, well, he talks about the fives club. I'm in the fives, so I can't be too bad. But if you're moving that direction, you may have outrageously high insulin. So this person is right in this respect. You can have fairly normal glucose and pretty high insulin. And he's saying, well, isn't high insulin the problem? It's very hard to distinguish and delineate between what's caused by high insulin versus what's caused by high glucose, because they're both a problem and they're both attacking your health and your body. There are some people who get so tunnel focused on the insulin, they will not even admit that high blood sugar is a problem at all. It's like the high blood sugar means nothing. Blood sugar, schmud sugar, that doesn't mean anything. It's just the high insulin. No, it's both. And Dr. Fung, speaking of him, he talks about glucose toxicity. And the word toxicity means poison. So your high glucose is poisoning your body. And he talks about insulin toxicity. They're both a problem. And it's very difficult to look at someone who's having some pretty severe symptoms and say, well, that's because of high insulin. But this one over here is because of high glucose. But it's definitely wrong, in my humble opinion, to say high glucose means absolutely nothing. It's all high insulin, because if that were true, the type 1 diabetics would have it made. They don't have any high glucose. They don't have any high insulin. They don't make insulin. So you can't accuse a type 1 of being, well, your problem is high insulin. No, their problem is not high insulin. They make none. And there are some type 2 diabetics who make very little insulin. And they may even need to be injecting insulin to kind of make up for the fact their poor pancreas is so worn out. Their beta cells have died to such a degree they can barely pump out a little. They're technically not type 1s. But they've gotten to the point, by severe abuse of their body and super hyperinsulinemia for a number of years, they've gotten to the point where they're just not producing much insulin at all. That's why I'm a little concerned with those who suggest the type 2 problem is totally and always high insulin. There are some who are not type 1, but they're kind of moving that direction in the sense that their pancreas is wearing out. And if they take an insulin test, the doctor will tell them, well, you're just not making much insulin at all. Now, if the other is true, which is usually the case with type 2 diabetics, if the other is true, and the doctor says, well, your insulin, you've got a lot of it going on. And that was my case when diabetes was coming at me. I had no problem with not enough insulin. I had all kinds. My pancreas was working overtime. And that's often true. So the idea, if your pancreas is pumping its little guts out and producing all kinds of insulin, and you're going through every day with boatloads of insulin surging through your blood and through your body, it doesn't seem very sensible to just add more insulin to the process. Well, yeah, I've got a lot of insulin, a lot of natural insulin, but I better add some other insulin and keep injecting until I can finally get things under control. How about cutting your carbohydrates? So he's saying, isn't your insulin levels the real problem? The answer is, well, they both. High glucose is a problem, and high insulin is a problem. And usually the pattern for type 2s is, if you don't do any intervention at all, your pancreas will start making more insulin and more insulin and more insulin, and your blood sugar levels won't be too bad for the longest time until finally your pancreas begins to fail. It gets filled with fat. Beta cells are either becoming worthless or they're dying. There's still a bit of debate about whether they really die or whether they just simply don't work anymore, and they may potentially be revived. But one way or the other, they're just not doing what beta cells are supposed to be doing. And finally, you're producing so little insulin that your blood sugar goes through the roof. And it would be wrong to just say, well, that every type 2 diabetic's problem is too much insulin. It's very difficult to tell about a specific complication. Well, that's because your insulin is too high, or that's because your glucose is too high, or that's because they're both too high. I think that can often be the case. You're running around every day with super high glucose, super high insulin, deadly duo. And that's doing all kinds of damage. And when you cut the carbohydrates and you stop eating so many grains and pasta and starchy foods, and definitely cut out all the sugars, glucose starts coming down and insulin starts coming down, and more glucose decrease and more insulin decrease, and fat starts burning off your liver and your pancreas, and your numbers get better, but it can take a while. Don't get the idea, well, if I just go low carb and eat a couple of meals a day instead of 3 and quit my snacks, boom, by next week I'll be fine. Once in a while it can happen in a few months. Well, let me take that back. Often it can happen in a few months, but not always by any means. And sometimes you've just gone too deep into diabetes for too many years, and there are other cases we can't explain it. Nobody can really explain it. It's just like, well, it's not working quickly, but it is working. So if you're running super high glucose of 300 milligrams per deciliter every day as an average glucose, and you've been at the low carb thing for 4 months and now it's 225. Well, 225 is terrible, but it's better than 300. So at least you're making some progress. But yeah, you need to find out where your insulin is. I mean, the first thing is just change your diet. I mean, that's the most basic, simplest way to see where you are and what you can achieve. And many, I would say most, find they can achieve phenomenal results just by going to a low carbohydrate diet, limiting their meals to 2 per day, stopping all snacks. Most type 2 diabetics find that will really make incredible progress for them in just a few months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, sometimes 3, but not all. So you want to stay with it. But if you've been at it for a long, long time, 9 months, and you have seen almost no progress, chances are you're not making much insulin. You go to that doctor and you have him test and see what's going on. And if you're not making enough insulin, don't be ashamed to inject insulin. It doesn't mean you'll have to do it the rest of your life. Some people are scared. The minute I take insulin, that means I'm done for. I'll be shooting myself with needles the rest of my life. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Sometimes you just need to give your body a break, give your pancreas a break, if you're not producing it. But if you're producing outrageous amounts of insulin, it doesn't make much sense to inject yourself with more insulin. But that's between you and your doctor. On my Bible channel, we're now offering audio podcasts of the Bible studies Ben and I have in the mornings.
An audio podcast means there's no video to watch, and that means you can listen to it while you're doing other things. If you're out and about, you can play it through your car stereo while driving. You can listen through earphones while you walk or exercise at the gym. And if you're at home and going to be in the same room for a while, you can simply put your phone on speaker, or you could buy an inexpensive Bluetooth radio and pair it with your phone, or do the same thing with a Bluetooth speaker. So welcome to our home as you drop in on Ben and me as we study the Bible together.